Multiplicative property is the fourth and last property of inequality. This property has three parts and each part has two conditions. First, we will discuss the part A and B and then we will move towards C. For part A, multiplicative property says if we multiply both sides of inequality with a common positive number, then inequality does not change its direction. Let we have three real numbers a, b and c. But there is one condition for first part. C should be greater than 0 means C should be positive. Now this property says if a is greater than b and we multiply both sides of inequality with a common positive number c, then in one multiplication the inequality does not change its direction. You can see a is greater than b. After multiplication, the product of AC would also be greater than the product of BC. This is the first condition of first part. The second condition of this part is if A is less than B and we multiply both sides of inequality with a common positive number C, then inequality does not change its direction. After the multiplication, the product of AC would be less than the product of BC. So these are the two conditions of first part. Let's take some real numbers to understand these two conditions. For first condition, let we have three real numbers. A is equal to 4, B is equal to 1 by 4 with decimal representation 0.25 and C should be positive real number. So C is equal to 3. For these numbers, we can see that A is greater than B as 4 is always greater than 0.25. Now we will multiply the both sides of inequality with a common positive number C, that is 3. As a result of multiplication, we get the product of AC 12 and the product of BC 0.75, and we know 12 is greater than 0.75. So this means that this condition is true. If we multiply both sides of inequality with a common positive number, then inequality does not change its direction. Let we have another three real numbers for condition 2. Let we have a is equal to minus 3, b is equal to minus 1 and c is equal to 2. By looking at these numbers, we can say that a is less than b as minus 3 is less than minus 1. Now we multiply both sides of inequality with a common positive number, and we will see either its direction will change or not. So as a result of product of A and C, we will get the result minus 6. Minus 3 into 2 is equal to minus 6. And as a result of multiplication of B and C, we will get the result minus 2. The product of minus 1, B and C, 2 is equal to minus 2. And we know minus 6 is always less than minus 2. So this condition is also true, as we have seen as a result of multiplication of a common positive number on both sides of inequality, the inequality did not change its direction. So these are the two conditions of first part. Let's move towards the second part of multiplicative property. For the second part, multiplicative property says if we multiply both sides of inequality with a common negative number, then inequality will change its direction after multiplication. The first condition of second part is if we have three real numbers a, b and c, and there is one condition for c for second part, that c should be less than 0 means c should be negative real number. Now, if we say a is greater than b and we multiply both sides of inequality with a common negative number c, then as a result of multiplication, the inequality will change its direction. Means the product of AC would be less than the product of BC, and C is negative integer in this case. And the second condition is if A is less than B and we multiply with a common negative number both sides of inequality, then as a result of multiplication, inequality will change its direction. As it is less than, it would be greater than after the multiplication with negative real number. Therefore, the product of AC would be greater than the product of BC. Let's take some real numbers to better understand these two conditions with the negative real number C. Let we have three real numbers. For first condition, A is equal to 1, B is equal to 1 by 8 with the decimal representation 0.125, and C should be negative real number, so C is equal to minus 2. Now for these real numbers, we can say A is greater than B, as 1 is always greater than 0.125. Now we multiply both sides of inequality with a common negative real number, minus 2, and check either the direction of inequality will change or not. The product of AC, 1 and minus 2 is equal to minus 2, and the product of BC, 0.125 and minus 2 is equal to minus 0.25. This is the product of AC and this is the product of BC, and we know minus 2 is always less than minus 0.25. For negative numbers, the number that is more closer to 0 is always greater. In our case, minus 0.25 is more closer to 0 as compared to minus 2. Therefore, minus 2 is less than minus 0.25. This means that this condition is true. Like for second condition, we have another three real numbers. A is equal to minus 2, B is equal to 3, and C is equal to minus 4, as C should be negative real number. We can say that A is less than B, as minus 2 is less than 3. Now we will multiply both sides of this inequality with the common negative number minus 4. As a result of product of A and C, minus 2 and minus 4, we will get 8, and as a result of product of B and C, 3 and minus 4, we will get minus 12, and we know 8 is always greater than minus 12. So you can see that as a result of multiplication with a negative number on both sides of inequality, inequality has changed its direction from less than to greater than. So this is the second part of multiplicative property. Let's move towards the third part of multiplicative property. The third part of multiplicative property has also two conditions. Let we have four real numbers A, B, C and D, and there is one condition for these four real numbers, and that is all the four real numbers should be positive. Now let's talk about first condition. First condition says the product of two greater numbers would always be greater than the product of two smaller numbers. Means if we say A is greater than B and C is greater than D, now we have two greater numbers A and C and two smaller numbers B and D. This property says the product of two greater numbers A and C would be greater than the product of two smaller numbers B and D. Let's check with some real numbers. Let we have four real numbers A, B, C and D. A is equal to 1.25, B is equal to 0.5, C is equal to 3 and D is equal to 0.125. From these numbers we can say A is greater than B, as 1.25 is greater than 0.5 and C is greater than D, as 3 is greater than 0.125. Now we will multiply two greater numbers 1.25 and 3, and as a result of multiplication we will get 3.75. This is the result of AC. And then we will multiply two smaller numbers 0.5 and 0.125, and as a result we will get 0.0625. This is the result of product of B and D. Now you can see the product of two greater numbers 1.25 and 3 is greater than the product of two smaller numbers 0.5 and 0.125. So this means this condition is correct. Now let's talk about the second condition. For this condition, multiplicative property says the product of two smaller numbers A and C would be less than the product of two greater numbers. Means if we have four real numbers, positive real numbers A, B and C, D, And if we say A is less than B and C is less than D, now we have two smaller numbers A and C and two greater numbers B and D. According to multiplicative property of inequality, the product of two smaller numbers A and C would be less than the product of two greater numbers B and D. For example, we have four real numbers. A is equal to 1, B is equal to 2.5, and C is equal to 3, and D is equal to 4. By looking at these numbers, we can say A is less than B as 1 is less than 2.5 and C is less than D as 3 is less than 4. Now we have two smaller numbers A and C, 1 and 3. We will get the product of 1 and 3, that is equal to 3, and we will also get the product of two greater numbers B and D, 2.5 and 4, and the product of 2.5 and 4 is equal to 10. So we can see the product of two smaller numbers A and C is less than the product of two greater numbers B and D. 3 is less than 10. So this means this condition is also true for real numbers. So guys, this is all about the properties of inequality.